Thanks, Charlie. Evening, everyone. My name's Andrew. I'm a very grateful recovered drug addict.
Hi, Andrew.
I'm also an alcoholic and disturbing in many other ways that I wouldn't discuss in a CA meeting. My sobriety date is the 26th of March 2024. And when I came into recovery, I was told that if I stayed in the centre of CA and AA, if I lived by these 12 steps, and if I put my trust and reliance in a higher power, then I would stay clean and sober. I've done all those things, and for just over 2 years, I've stayed clean and sober.
Well done, man.
So there's no reason for me to doubt that if I carry on doing those things, I won't continue to stay clean and sober. I was listening to the readings before the meeting, and it says in who is a CA member, it says the question that I shouldn't be asking myself as I look around the room is, would I have partied with these people? Well, I'm not sure the word party is a word that I would use in association with the serious business I was involved with when I drank and took drugs. I was a chronic alcoholic, a daily intravenous heroin user and a crack addict, and things got dark for me pretty quickly. So I guess I'm blessed that I don't suffer from what one might call euphoric recall. I don't really remember the party times. I'm sure there were some, but they were really short-lived. I do remember the confusion, the bafflement, the despair that I found when I walked into a treatment centre in March of 2024. And I remember how I felt for the last 10, 15 years of my drinking and using. There's a paragraph from Bill's story that says, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Heroin was my master. Crack cocaine was my master. And just like quicksand, the harder I seemed to fight it, the deeper I seemed to sink. See, the problem is, for me, when I drink and take drugs, I drink and use bucket loads. Put quite simply, if I take a drink or a drug, I immediately want another one. And I don't decide when I stop. It decides when I stop. The other problem I have is that I have a mechanism that's set up in my mind, a little sub-program, that every now and then will shoot a little message to the front of my brain, and it will say, drink, use, drink, use. And if I'm left in charge of my own life, I will obey that command. So step one was really bad news for me. Step one guaranteed me that 100% left to my own devices I would drink and use again, and when I drink and use again, it's probably going to kill me. So that was really bad news. In step two, it got even worse, because step two told me that the only hope I've got is an intervention from a higher power that I didn't believe in when I came in. I had been trying to get clean for good and stop drinking and using for good since the age of 29, when I went into my first detox and rehab. I actually got clean and sober at the age of 57, which tells you something about alcoholism and addiction. It tells you that just making a decision that I'm not going to drink and use again isn't enough. I made that decision many times. And when I came into recovery, I was so confused and bewildered as to why it was that every time I said this, looking at the general devastation in every area of my life, this has to stop, I could never stay stopped. No matter what detox I went into, no matter what rehab I went into, and I went in a few, no matter what day program I attended, no matter how often I filled out a drinks diary and tried to cut down one day at a time. And we talk about the hopeless alcoholic or the hopeless addict. when I left I think it was my 6th detox and walked into my 4th treatment centre, I was completely hopeless. And when I say that, I mean I had no hope that anything was going to work for me. I'm not even sure I wanted to stop, to be honest, because I didn't think it was possible. I couldn't imagine my life without drinking and using. It's all I'd ever known. And I came out of a detox and I was driven 5.5 hours away to what I thought was going to be, you know, yet another rehab. And I'll be honest with you, I say I'm not even sure I wanted to stop. I just wanted everything else to stop. All the noise, all the carnage, all the consequences, because things had got really bad. I haven't got long enough to go into the story of the things that brought me in. But it included an overdose, an accident in which I nearly lost my hand, a suicide attempt that had brought me to the point of collapse. But I'm not even sure then I wanted to stop. I thought if I could just get a break, if I can just breathe for a few months, then I'll be ready to go again. And this time I'll manage better. But I wasn't going into a rehab. I was going into a 12-step boot camp. I walked into that place looking and feeling like I'd been dug up. People later told me they thought I might die, possibly right in front of them. I was met on the steps of the treatment centre by a very gruff Yorkshireman who put a blue book in my hand and said, "Read this, it will save your life." And I thought, what are you talking about? How is a book going to save my life? And I arrived conveniently in time to be taken straight into a 2-hour big book study. And I'm sitting in this big book study, full of fear, full of self-pity. I looked at the steps on the wall, and I listened to people reading from this big book, and the penny dropped. It might have something to do with God. And I really try not to use profanity when I speak these days, but I'm going to anyway. I sat in that big book study and I thought, if this is my way out, I must be really fucked. And I made the decision then and there that I was going to leave, that this wasn't for me. I was introduced to the man that would take me through the 12 steps in that treatment centre. A man who inspired me and inspires me today. You know, we all have our Ebby. Well, he was my Ebby. And we sat down and I said, "This is really nice of you." I said, "But I'm not staying." I said, "This isn't for me." I said, "This might work for people like you, but it's not going to work for me." Because I constructed such an image in my own mind that I was so unique that there can't possibly be a program that works for other people that would work for me, because I need something that's specifically designed, because I'm, you know, just so special. And he said, "Andrew, I've got news for you." He said, "You're not special and different." He said, "You're just a bog standard drug addict, and people like you die." And he got me to give it a few days, and I thought, you know, I can do that as a favour. And I really thought, I'll give it a few days till Monday morning, and then I can say, "I've tried it, it doesn't work," and I can leave. But you know, despite every fibre of my being wanting to walk out of that treatment centre, something kept my backside in there. There was something more powerful in operation, more powerful than my mind. And I remember during those few days sitting in my room in that treatment centre, looking out the window, coming off a detox, you know, I couldn't sleep. I was in floods of tears, and I'm not a crier. People who know me, I'm not at the cold end of that spectrum. But, you know, I'm not really a crier, but I was in floods of tears, and I was just overwhelmed by this feeling that I was done. I was finished. I had a window of opportunity, and that if I didn't dive through it, I wasn't going to make it. And in that moment of defeat, of internal collapse, I had the curious feeling that things were going to be okay. I experienced hope, and I hadn't experienced hope for a very long time. Do you know, if you'd have asked me why it was I drank and used the way I did, for as long as I did, I could have given you any one of 1,000 reasons. I could have said, if you had the childhood that I had, you drink and use like I did. If you had the education that I had, you drink and use like I did. I mean, I went to a really posh school, but I blame that. You know, if this had happened in your life, you drink and use. If you felt like I did, you drink and use. But the fact is, none of those reasons would have been true, because I'm not a reliable witness to why it is I drink and use when I'm drinking and using. Because all those reasons are just the mask, the smokescreen that my addiction puts up to convince me that I've got a reason for doing what I'm doing. Because the truth is so horrific that I have to be kept from it by my ego, by my illness. And the truth is that I'm acting under compulsion. That's the only reason I drink and use the way I drink and use. I've got a parasite that lives inside me that's controlling my life and making my decisions for me. So I don't, you know, and this is just my experience, I don't believe that I was drinking and using on my feelings or my circumstances. So my recovery doesn't depend on my internal condition or my external circumstances, which is a relief. And what I read in the big book matches my experience. When you think about the story of a certain American businessman, left his treatment with Carl Jung in splendid, unusual mental and physical condition, drunk. If you think about the man of 30, retired after a happy and successful business career, got everything he wanted, drunk. The story of Jim. Jim was having a perfectly normal day. I know he got a bit irritated and people make a lot out of that resentment. I don't think that's what's going on in that story. Jim was having a pretty normal day, drunk. Fred. Let's get to Fred. What a splendid fellow Fred is. Charming wife and family, splendid businessman, all very charming. I'm not very charmed. He makes me quite sick, really. But, you know, end of a perfect day, drunk. So that tells me that it's not how I feel or what's going on that causes me to drink and use. There's something else going on here. And if you think about the stories of Jim and Fred, it says the thought crossed my mind. And Fred said the thought came to mind, or something like that. They're basically the same thing. So I don't get to choose when that thought comes in that tells me to drink and use. Jim and Fred didn't go out and look for that thought. They didn't think that thought. The thought thought them. Does that make sense? You know, and that's been my experience. I remember leaving my first treatment centre, my first rehab. I went in when I was 29, did a detox and 3 months there, and found out a little bit about alcoholism and addiction, you know, self-knowledge. And I'm very good at playing a role, at presenting a character to people that I think you want to see. And I did that very well in that rehab. So I looked like I was doing all the stuff and doing the do and everything. And I was made, you know, house leader, and I was the only one in there with a single room. So, you know, obviously I left with a girlfriend. And, you know, I got my health back. And when I walked in there, you know, I was a street junkie. My teeth were falling out. I had no veins left. I had a track mark up my neck and I was covered in sores. And I left there in, you know, peak physical condition. I'd won back the trust of my family and convinced convinced that because I knew I was an addict, I wasn't going to use again. And within 2 weeks, I was sitting on the floor of a squat with a needle in my arm, thinking, how did I get here again? And I repeated that behaviour over and over again, every time convinced that this time it was going to be different. So the difference was with this treatment centre in March 24, when I felt like walking out, suddenly I realised that I was 100% guaranteed to drink and use again. And that terrified me. That terrified me more than the word God. It terrified me more than the steps. And I made a decision in that treatment centre to follow everything that was suggested to me. For the first time in my life, I put my hands up and I said, I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. I realised that whatever plan I had wasn't going to kick in anytime soon. I realised that my way hadn't been working so well. And I surrendered to this program. And I followed everything that was suggested in that treatment centre. I haven't got time to tell you the experience that I had there. But we talk about spiritual awakening. As I went through the steps in that treatment centre and began to realise what I really suffered from, what I'm really up against, once I realised that, that was the rocket up my backside that launched me into the rest of this program like my life depended on it. And I came in there, I described myself as an atheist. You know, I said, I don't do God. Mm-hmm. And my teacher said to me, he said, what do you know about God? Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything. Mm-hmm. I was a really interesting kind of atheist. I'd done absolutely no investigation on the subject whatsoever, talked to nobody who knew anything and read nothing on the subject, but I knew. And the second question he asked me was, how's it been working out for you so far with that idea? And when I think about it, the way I'd been living my life as if I was in charge, if I was the centre of the universe, that there was nothing else out there than me, that how it says in the book, life begins with nothing, goes nowhere and ends nowhere. That is the most depressing viewpoint you can have, isn't it? I know somebody that went out there after a little bit of sobriety and is using again, and he couldn't get his head around the higher power bit. He still believed that life actually started nowhere and meant nothing and ended nowhere. And the fact is, he ended up drinking and using again because that proposition is just too depressing. So when it came to this higher power bit and the God bit and everything, when it was suggested that I prayed and I meditated, I didn't know what I was praying to, but I did it. And as I did it, I began to feel this spirit. And as I looked back, I started to realise that from those last years of my drinking and using, I believe I was being turned towards the light. I was being pulled to that place that I was at now. And there's a beautiful bit in our big book. It says, when we look back, we realise that the things which came to us when we placed ourselves in God's hands are better than anything we could have planned ourselves. Well, I'm not sure I placed my life in God's hands, but my life was certainly taken out of my hands. And as I go through these steps and reveal and strip away this ego, this self that has been driving me all this time, and begin to get this new way of looking at the world, these new eyes, as my old ideas drop away from me, I began to realise what my purpose in life was. That I'm here for a reason. And that is to be useful and helpful to other people. So when it comes to step 3, what does step 3 tell us? That the solution to the spiritual malady, which I believe is not an emotional or psychological problem, I think it's a philosophical position that has to be changed. Spiritual malady is me running my own life, putting myself in direct opposition to God, running life on self-will, making a decision about what I'm going to take out of life, devising a plan to go and get it, acting out on that plan, completely disregarding the fact that God might have another plan and other people have got other plans. The solution to that in step 3 is very simply that I'm to enter into a working relationship with something we're going to call God. And as part of that relationship, I will be taken care of if I stay close to God and perform his work well. So put very simply, I am to become a servant of God. I'm very happy to claim that title today. Servant of God. Maybe not even first servant, second servant of God. Because I can either be a slave, a miserable slave to the ego and the self, or I can be a happy servant today. Talks in Bill's story about Ebbet. It says his roots grasped new soil. But I have a choice today. I can either be planted in self or I can be planted in God. The result of that today, that in those 2 years, 2 and a bit years, my life has just been transformed. When I left the treatment centre, my teacher said, I said to him, I said, look, you know, what if I get out there and it's really dull and it's really boring and I'm hanging on by my fingernails? And he said, I don't think that will happen to you, Andrew. He said, you're not really a half measures kind of guy. He said, you'll either be all in or you'll be all out. He said, but I promise you this, if you're all in, if you give this 100%, it will get better every day. The phrase he used was that your life would be rocketed into the 4th dimension. I didn't know what that meant, but it sounded kind of cool to a drug addict like me. I know what that means today. I've developed a new phenomenon of craving today for life, for love, for God, for spirit. This call to action that we get from God, this sincere desire to be helpful to others. And I'll finish on this. At the end of Fred's story, it says, I have since been brought into a way of life infinitely more satisfying and I hope more useful than the one I had. And those 2 words, satisfying and useful, are so interlinked for me. Because although the aim of my life today is not my own satisfaction, my own happiness, my aim of my life today is to be useful to others and to help others. The byproduct of that is that when I do that, I get a peace of serenity and happiness beyond anything I could have imagined. And what a beautiful, privileged position we're put in today, you know, in these rooms in Cocaine Anonymous, to be able to carry this message to the person that still suffers. I've got the best job in the world today. I work for God today. I have no apologies by saying I'm a man of God, I'm a man of spirit today. And what we do in these rooms, as one of my teachers never tires of pointing out, is that we take the hand of the addict and alcoholic that still suffers and hopefully place it in the hand of a God of his or her own understanding. I'll leave it there.